by the synovial fluid. Now there are a couple other features of these joints. One of them is bursa. So many of the joints have outgrowths. So the synovial membrane is the synovial membrane in the joint itself has an outgrowth, an outpouching called a bursa. Now it may be part of the irregular synovial joint, like this post-patellar bursa, or it might be separate and grow on its own. But it's just like the synovial joint. It's got a fibrous capsule, it's got a synovial membrane, and it makes synovial fluid. And what it does is pad or protect the joint. So there's one right here between the kneecap and the femur, so that when you kneel on your knee, you don't grind these two bones together. And since it was raised, you can have a spontaneous outpouching, a little one, of a synovial joint. They happen in people's finger joints quite a bit, and it creates a very painful little baby bursa. It's temporary, but sometimes when they're in various areas that are very active, they can cause a lot of pain, like this Baker cyst. Now, this is just a spontaneous blowout, so to speak, of the synovial joint, and it should be very temporary. But when they're really big, they'll go in and they'll cauterize them and seal them off. But yeah, so you have to think of the bursa as kind of like they have formed quite spontaneously, but their job is really to pad and protect joints, especially joints that are not protected by good deep bony sockets like the shoulder joint. So it holds everything together. There's also a special kind of bursa, I guess you could call it, called a tendon sheath. Very, very long tendons. So these are ropes that attach a muscle to a bone. Very long tendons move back and forth dramatically. Like, look at the ones in your, I can't do that side, I don't have that tendon over there. But you see the tendons here in the forearm? Just, see, put your hand like a fist, put your other hand on the fist, and then flex and extend your wrist. You can see the tendons pop up. Or if you're older like me, you can see the tendons on the top of your hand. And these are very long. So when they move back and forth, there's a lot of friction. So really, really long tendons have a tendency to be wrapped in your own little bursa to lubricate them so that there's not too much friction when they move back and forth. But a lot of these tendons have the problem that they're wrapped in fibrous sheets to tack them down. And if you move them back and forth too much, you can get an inflammation, a bursitis of that tendon or a tendinitis. For example, carpal tunnel syndrome happens because the tendons that run the fingers here, are wrapped in a fibrous sheet to tack them all down so they don't go boing and pop up all over the place. But they're restricted. And if you use the tendons too much, they can become inflamed, and the synovial membrane can make too much fluid. Then they get enlarged and painful. And because they're entrapped by this fibrous wrapper, you can get a lot of restriction, pain, and actual compression of nerves. All right, what do we have here? And then finally, there is such a thing as a meniscus. I don't have a picture. I have to go forward. There it is. No, it's not even showing. There we go. A few joints actually have, synovial joints have extra protection in them. It's something called a meniscus. It's a pad of fibrocartilage. You have them in your knee. These are the cartilages of your knee that protect the joint between the femur and the tibia. So you have all these accessory structures that protect the joint, strengthen and stabilize it. But of course, they're all sources of particular problems when you overuse the joint. All right, now there's some general terminology that might be used to describe synovial joints. The articulations between the two bones can have very particular shapes that allow certain kinds of range of motion. So you'll hear these terms used in the laboratory a lot. You might see me using them on an exam, but I'm not going to ask you what it means. So a ball and socket joint is a joint, it's a synovial joint where one bone has a round head and the other joint has a cuff-like surface. Hip joints are famous for this. And this allows incredible range of motion, okay? Because the head can swivel in the joint very, very nicely. A condyloid or ellipsoidal joints you find in your fingers, you find them between the upper and lower leg bones, between the upper and lower arm bones. And these are not deep joints, not deep bony joints. But what you'll have is the two joints will be shaped like bulges, one bulge fitting into the small bulge of the next. The sliding joints, is that what they call these? I didn't put the label up. Oh, plane or gliding joints. Oh, should have done that better. Not very many places you have them. Mostly in the bones of your wrist and in your ankle, where you have little square bones, and these are all synovial joints, all right, that have to fit tightly together like puzzle pieces, but slide back and forth a little bit to give. So when you stand on your ankles or you put pressure on your hands, that the bones there kind of settle in and move around a little bit. So it gives the joint a little squishiness in every direction without a significant range of motion. But remember, these are synovial joints. So if you have an arthritis condition of any type, you can get arthritis pain in the synovial joints of your wrists, okay, and in your ankles. Now the hinge joint, which you see between the lower and upper arm bones, I don't know if you guys know this stuff now. This is the olecranon process of the ulna that fits into the humerus, and it fits in as a hook and allows the joint to swivel back and forth and move in one direction only. So the movement is limited. And then pivot joints are joints where the two bones spin around each other. The radius and the ulna up at the top are wrapped in a ligament, and the radius can rotate around the ulna to allow you to do this with your forearms, to flip them back and forth. You also have a pivot joint up at the top of your skull, the top two vertebrae in your skull spin around each other and allowing the odontoid process. Not yet. I won't go into it then. So the top two bones fit together with a stick on one vertebrae and a smooth facet on the other. And they allow you to spin your head.
The atlas and the axis.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
We did it in our head. Saddle joints are also found in very limited locations. The thumb with the first bone of the wrist. It's a modified cup-shaped joint. I don't know how much you're going to be using these in lab. I think probably all you'll really see is something like the ball and socket joint and maybe a condyloid and plane-like joints. So I don't spend a lot of time on them. Now what I want to do instead is pick some selected synovial joints of the body. We're going to learn a little bit about their anatomy, the things they do well, the things they do badly, and the kinds of problems you have because of their construction. So of course we're going to do the knees first, because the knees are one of our biggest problems. The knees are not a problem in four-legged animals. They're designed beautifully to carry some of the weight of running on your fours, all right? The problem with the knee joint is that we evolved from a four-legged ancestor, and our skeleton is a modification of that for running on all fours. And we've made some good changes. Our pelvis has rotated, the sockets of the hips have become deeper, but the knee joint has not changed very